Great. So nice to see everybody hustling around. Great to stretch your legs a little.
Oh, Lord.
While you're stretching your minds. Beautiful. Beautiful.
About the chair.
Great. How'd that go? Yeah, we're excited to hear. We're really excited to hear what you have to say. So, in a second, we'll be welcome your questions. We may pause after a few and have a conversation, especially if either of you have something you really want to respond to. Otherwise, we met a whole bunch of them go, but then we'll be talking with you. So, there are 4 places for the questions to go, and I think we can begin. Let's get our first question. Starting over here. Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I think something that we discussed is why is it that we feel as though the concept of Americanness is something that needs saving? Why? Because American sovereignty, the concept of America was built on settler colonialism, native genocide, African slavery. Why do we feel as though this is a project that needs to become more inclusive as opposed to maybe something that needs to be dismantled?
Great, thank you. And do you want to get right on that?
Do we respond right away?
I think actually, we'll experiment with our process a little bit. Let's get a response right away, but then we'll try to get a few in a row. But go ahead.
I would actually say thanks for asking that question. I'm one of those. I have had a very hard evolution in the process of
I'll hold your chair.
It's the process of, there's this truism that we like to say because it makes us feel good that we're a nation of immigrants, instead of really facing the reality that this is a settler colonial project, as you had mentioned, right? But how do you have that conversation? I mean, I've been fascinated by the Take a Knee movement and the reaction of conservative white people that I've interviewed and talked to about it. It's almost like they're getting to know their America for the first time, and they're like, what? What do you mean America isn't great, right? So how do we have a conversation about America, right, that questions, right, that is actually based on the inquiry of asking, how do you even define it? Like, the most important part of our logo is the question mark. It's not define American, period. It's define American, question mark. And to me, that includes Central America, that includes South America, that includes that very understanding, again, of why people move in migration, right? So.
Great. And Mac, do you want to respond, or should we keep going with questions?
I mean, all I'll say is, people tend to take action not because they know what's wrong or because they don't. The issue isn't whether or not people know what's wrong. The issue is what do they believe is possible. So the question for me isn't about what we're going to dismantle. It's about what we're going to transform into.
Yeah. Yep.
And we can come back to thinking about how that actually works, how we make that transformation move. So let's hear another question.
Up on the terrace, up to your left.
Way up there.
Let's see.
One moment, please.
Yep.
Hi, thank you. My question is, why do we need to define what American is in the first place versus Colombian versus other places? I'm Colombian, and I've been living here in the United States for a long time, and now I don't feel neither Colombian nor American, so what would I be in that context? And I think we're blurring those boundaries.
Great, thank you. And let's hear some more questions. We'll try to get 2 or 3 or 4 out before we pause this time for some answer or some responses. Yeah. The hands are up, so just keep your hands up, and there, Mike will come to you. Great.
Yeah, in our group, we had this intersection of what the question was posed as the master narrative, and there was also a question about power, that even posing the question that way was giving up the power to define what America is and to define what the narrative is. So we kind of landed on then, how do you disrupt the power that allows you to determine what the definition of America is? And that to be able to claim the idea, even though the reality may be settler colonial, that there's still this idea of a place of refuge for all of the people who come here. And how do we capture the power to make that the narrative rather than question the master?
Okay, great. How do we capture that power? Let's hang on to some of these ideas and see where you might want to go. Maybe we could take another one or two.
Liz, I've got a question up right.
Thank you.
Hi, folks. I'm Libby, she, her, hers. We had two questions that we thought were related to each other. We wanted to talk about how to blow up the idea of a master narrative, so maybe even greater than American. And we thought that was related to what is our real history and our authentic history, as opposed to the history that we've been given or bought into.
Great. Maybe let's pause for a second and check in. Since there seems to be a lot of reflection about that master narrative, let's reflect a little bit on that. And we're getting at it now from both the point of view of power, but now also history and what is even our authentic histories. So,
Mac, you want to say something, or should I?
I mean, it's up to you. I'm trying to figure out how to sit in the chair, so you might want to. Like, is this good? I feel like I'm laying down a little bit, but.
do you want me?
That's awesome.
I ain't tripping. I feel comfortable, so.
It is about the body. Let's just keep that in mind. Yes.
Okay, so why I was really struck by the American question part of the Colombian, the woman who's Colombian, who's American, and where do you fit? So as someone who's Filipino, who's proud to be Filipino, like I'm proud to be Filipino. Like I'm adobo eating, I sleep with Filipinos, like I'm proud to be Filipino, right? And I also am from the Bay Area, where my high school textbook was Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. That was my high school textbook. It wasn't until I got hired at the Washington Post, surrounded by a bunch of people, that I realized that I came from a socialist, anarchist place, right? So all those three questions that were about defining American, I see, of course, as someone who is, I can occupy the space that I occupy because of, as I had already said, Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, and Chino Achebe. Like, that's kind of where I come from in terms of how I do that and how I just do not get scared when I get on the TSA line at SFO tomorrow going back to Oregon, right? Like, that's how I do it. Like, I understand that my life is not defined by these papers and these laws and these documents. However, most of America, that's why I mentioned when I started my instigation, that I have done all these Tea Party, Republican, conservative events because that, first of all, that's the most uncomfortable I get, right? I wonder how many of us who ask these questions have actually done that, have engaged to people who don't share the system of reality that is in your head, that questions that very system, right? And for me, just even questioning it opens a door instead of shutting it out, right? How do I talk to people about America, the America that they want to aspire to because of the delusions and the myths that they have internalized, and get to a common page about something, And, it's easy for us, it's easy for me coming in the Bay Area to get into this conversation of, and I have to say, by the way, sometimes for me, the hardest battles have been with progressive activists who don't seem to want to solve a problem, who think that being right is the same thing, where being right is the most important thing. So I'm just going to stop there. Mac?
Okay, Mac?
Before I get myself in further trouble, my email is jose@defineamerican.com, so feel free to just email me if you want to talk. Go ahead, Mac.
Well, now that I have sat up, I'm ready to have this conversation. I'm black. My family is from Jamaica. So, am I an immigrant? It's a question that I have. I was born in Brooklyn, East Coast. And and that history means that for me, I don't have any homeland. America's not my homeland. We didn't grow up, my family's not from the American South. I don't know anything about, we didn't grow up with that food, we didn't grow up with that cultural tradition, and yet my mother was born in Brooklyn too. It's her parents that are from Jamaica. And so we don't have that either. We don't have Africa. So when I think about this question of defining American, and I'm thinking about three things. One is, what is the meaning and purpose of a national identity? See, because to me, national identity is forged for the purposes of profit. National identity is forged for the purposes of colonial, it's a colonial identity. And that's true everywhere in the world. That's not, it's only in relation to America that that's not true. But like in Jamaica, there is a colonial project, you know, and there are poor people, and there are people who are suffering, and there are elite. I mean, so I guess what I'm saying is this national identity in and of itself, we have to question its purpose, yeah? That's true in America, and that's true all over the world. But I think about the purpose of land, the purpose of having an identity, and the second part that comes to me is, so who are we then, right? Who are we then if we are not bound by national identity and a history and a legacy, right, of colonialism, then what are we bound by? Is there a way for us to be bound by core values? Is there a way for us to be bound by shared humanity? Is there a way for us to be bound in identity, but not solely through identity? You know, is there a way for us to do that? So that's about vision. And I think too often we are deep in the midst of intellectual critique and are not about building vision. Where are we going? What do you want? The last thing that I say about that, because I said there was three things, there's always three, so sometimes I just make up the third, because I just like symmetry, you know. And so my third thing, you know, is, I can do it, right? Can I, what's the third thing? I mean, okay, the third thing is, I think that we have to, I have one, I'm sorry, y'all.
I'm gonna,
Two things.
Liz, I have a question over here from a young girl, a young woman, and if she doesn't get her answer question, her arm's going to come off. So,
oh, right.
Great. We have 2 minutes.
Hi.
Hi.
So my question is, if one person can reverse so much positive change, then if everyone in this room is to work together to reverse that and build it up again, wouldn't it be easy to fix this?
There's a question. Thank you for that question, and let's hear a few more. We'll kind of get a group going again.
Liz, we have a question over here.
Beautiful.
Is that the only time we got left? Okay.
So in our group, there were some very interesting questions. The first question that came up was, how did we all get to this understanding? And each of us, I think, there's from radicals to wherever we are. But the question that came out, citizenship is engagement, and it begins close to home. And one has to be an activist. But our question is, and it was based on your thoughtful comments, how to change the larger idea of citizenship from what's legal to a state of being, as to follow your thinking.
That comes back to also what Mac just said. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's, Can we hear some more?
Yes.
Back up on the terrace to your left.
Okay.
Hi. I think what I was really struck by in the narrative conversation is that we don't really have the right language. And what I'm really interested in is if there's immigrants and there's refugees, is there another word for someone who is taken here and brought here not by choice? And I don't know that word, but I'm wondering if that exists.
Can I just comment on that really quickly? I'm so happy you brought that up. This is why there are 244 million people globally who live in places that they're not born into, right? Most of them is what people would call migrants. In America, we call them immigrants. A lot of them are refugees. The language of this issue is all wrong, right? If you look at the United Nations Charter, there isn't even an acknowledgement of migration as a human right, right? I mean, I wish I could just go, define being a human being. But I can't do that in Wisconsin and Alabama, where they're chasing me out, wondering why an illegal gay Asian it's like somebody would call me the Gaysian or whatever, which I thought was really funny, right? Meaning I have to be able to go at the language that they know and then turn it upside down. Hence the question marks, right? So, but yeah. Lisa.
Just say, the idea of multiple words for the same thing helps us begin to manage multiplicity, which is one of the questions that we have. It's not a singular narrative, it's multiple narratives. Can I just do it 1 second and just say that I'm interested also, however, that multiplicity can lead someone to say, as I believe, I just mentioned 4 definitions of truth in South Africa and what that meant, but now we have a president who also uses multiple definitions of truth.
Yep.
And so how we find the moral infrastructure to allow for what might be both ambiguity and multiple narratives when...
I feel that, but also if someone is brought here by force and made to work without pay, that's called the slave. That's called being enslaved. Yeah, for me, there's a word for it, and it's called slavery. And the reality is that most migration, even though we have different drivers, is by force, one way or another. Now, whether it's by direct force,
economic force,
or some other kind of systematic force, economics or, war, is a force, it's a type of force. Migration, when my family came to the United States, it was an economic trajectory, but when they came to Jamaica, it was through slavery.
Yeah.
So, all of this is force. All of this is force.
I'm gonna go ahead, Jose, and then I want to go back to questions. And I hear you.
Which is back to this point of questioning the root causes of migration. Like we talk about NAFTA, like it only impacted American workers. Like what did it do to Mexican workers, right? But I have to tell you though, this conversation that we're having is not the conversation that the rest of the country is having, right? And again, how do we get to your question about vision? So how do we then together bridge a gap that is so wide? It's oceanic, this gap, right? And it's not gonna happen with politicians who are too busy getting elected, right? It's gonna happen with storytellers and artists and disruptors. I think that's where it's gonna happen.
Great, thank you. Let's go on and hear some more questions.
We have one
Liz,
over here.
We're gonna try to get a whole bunch now because we haven't heard enough from you, so I wanna hear a whole lot of them.
Oh man.
Okay.
Got one up on your left here. We were looking at the digital media questions. Who is media serving? Consumer or provider? How do we keep and use our power as consumers and users? I'm going to add on one, sorry group, I just thought of this. What if we walked away from social media?
Is there a question out there? Yeah, keep your hands up and
Liz,
then
we've
people
got a
come with the
question over
mics.
here.
Okay.
Hi. Our group had a lot of questions. One question that we had was, do you need to share a language as activists? Are there other ways to bridge and build?
Yeah.
Questions? Hands up?
Liz, we've got one down right.
All right.
So I tried to cobble together the conversation we had, and I came up with, how do we question the purpose of ideas like dignity and power, and who gets to build those definitions in the moral infrastructure that dictates our lives and our body's experience in the digital era?
Okay.
My question is about, every one of us is in a group and we have people that are in a group. How do we get out of that group and meet people from these other groups that we're talking about, other nationalities, other sexual preferences, other political groups, for example, and interact and become friends and have a communication where we can listen to each other?
Down right.
Question from my group was, how do we leverage our shared narrative while also leaving room for our individual truths? And then I want to add on to that a question that I thought of as I sat here thinking more about narrative, which was that if we wrote a new national anthem, what would the chorus be?
Something Beyonce would write.
We've got one down right.
All right. Thank you.
Hi. So we started a lot actually thinking about sort of the word immigrant and whether or not we actually like the word, thinking about that borders are sort of made up and people are just people moving. And so then we started thinking about narratives in terms of the questions that we ask to get to those narratives, and that there's a big focus on where people are coming from in their past, which is very important, but also maybe thinking about how to change some of that narrative into where you want to go and what you want to be, and sort of thinking about vision as a way to drive narrative.
We have a question up here.
Hi, Jose. Hyunju here. Old coworker wanted to say hi.
Oh, hi.
And our group, Rose, Sam, and Margie, have a two-part question. The first is, how do we reconcile, learn, and teach the truth of our genocidal, segregationist, and exclusionary history?
Yep.
And how do we address the racial lens that defines who belongs in the U.S. and our connections to the rest of the world?
Hi, I've got a couple of thoughts from our group. On the topic of the master narrative, we asked, how can it not be so commercialized, which would then mean we'd have to redefine capitalism. How do we redefine capitalism, and how do we pull those commercial strings out of the narrative? Secondly, we talked about how to teach this art of inquiry to young people.
Downright.
So one of the questions that was raised up on the stage was basically the question, the system of reality that's in one's head. And we came up with something that was similar to that, which is, why are people attached to their own truth? And you could substitute the word truth with lie as well. You know, but essentially, how do we augur into people's beliefs and then ideally figure out a way to actually either change that or create a question mark for it?
Mm-hmm.
We have another question up left.
All right.
How can we empower people when we're living in a culture of fear? And we all know that the political powers and everything are trying to also make people feel fearful about everything. So how do you overcome that and get people to stand up and empower themselves?
Great. Let's do one more, and then I want to give our two panelists a chance to respond. Yes, I think it's more like an opportunity to reflect now over the whole thing that we've been talking about.
We've got one more in the balcony.
That would be great. Let's hear that one.
As we began thinking about the culture of fear, and that even the definition of immigrant is like people trying to steal the stuff. How do we disrupt that as a narrative is, at least for me, personal psychology is, what am I contributing? If I can answer the question, what am I contributing, and everyone else can answer the question, what are they contributing, then we have an opportunity to work together to make something, rather than relying on grand narratives that are, for the most part, discounting all of us.
Yep.
Okay, so let me turn back to you two. Any final reflections as we get ready to move on that you'd like to say?
Citizenship. Two things. Education. So we're actually, we've started an education department within the organization because we hear from so many teachers in elementary, middle school, and high schools about how do they better integrate immigrant into their curriculum, how to talk about it. So that's really, really important. I'm glad somebody brought that up. But citizenship. A few years ago, I spoke to an immigration lawyer who told me that the fact that I lied about being a U.S. citizen to get a job at the San Francisco Chronicle in 2000 was the very reason why I will never become a U.S. citizen. So when you lie on a form, called the employment form, and you check a U.S. citizen box, it is the gravest offense you can do is to lie and false claim citizenship. And that may be the only reason why I can never become an American citizen. I'm saying that because I then had to define for me what citizenship is, which is that the world does not revolve around me. That being a citizen means that I understand that I occupy a space, that I can learn how to stand up and sit straight, but realize that my relationship to this land and to this earth is connected to the freedom of all of these other people around me. That is citizenship to me. That's my idea of American.
Thank you. Mac, last thoughts?
A couple things. One, I really appreciate all the questions about citizenship, about migration. I think about it a lot. And I think my comment on that is the idea that black people are citizens in this country is a lie.
Yep.
We are not. We have pieces of paper.
Yep.
And the fact is that what I hope that our experience of citizenship helps everyone else understand is that pieces of paper do not make you a citizen. They simply sell you a dream and a lie. So, that's my hope, that the black experience of citizenship in the United States helps everyone really understand that it is a construction that can be abridged at any time, and often is. So that's one piece. And then the other thing I would say, it's just this idea that, sometimes I think like in places like the Bay Area, we could have like a great philosophy class, We just be pondering shit, you know what I mean? And that's dope. I like to ponder stuff too, mostly in the hot tub, but I'm down to ponder with the community, you know what I mean? But I just want to bring to the fore that, my uncle is in prison for life on a crime that he didn't commit. He was a Black Panther, and that many of the Black Panthers who are currently serving life sentences were imprisoned for the so-called crime of committing killing a police officer. And the reason I bring this up is because now you have a term, Black identity extremist, that the FBI has newly designated, and this term refers to Black extremists who they think will kill police officers. Now, this type of terminology and this type of designation also opens up the opportunity for the FBI to get warrants for all kinds of otherwise unjustified searches and other kinds of investigations that wouldn't take place. But more importantly, and most importantly actually, what it does is it sets up a very dangerous conflict with officers being trained to treat Black activists as domestic terrorists. Yep. And then you end up in situations where people are in prison for life in this kind of violent conflict. So what I want to say is that it's not about what we individually do, it's about what we do collectively. It's not about what I decide in my mirror, it's about the mirror that we all face with each other. It's about organizing together. We ask ourselves, what can we change? How can we change things? We change it through organizing. Organizing is the key, and that means it's not about becoming friends. I don't need to be your friend for me to stand by your side in solidarity and organize with you and fight for justice. We don't need to be homies. We need to be in solidarity, and that's what I want to leave you with.
Yep. Yeah.
So everybody, it's dark, but what I want to do in order to finish this session and also to get ready for Lil Buck, who's going to be coming out, such an amazing mover, is to let us just use our bodies and ourselves for just a second to perhaps be together. So I'm just going to use the movement that Mac just used to take us into this beautiful place, difficult, challenging, extraordinary place that we are at this moment with the story she just told us. So you may have seen, she took her hands like this, so I'm asking you, it's dark, but just put your hands up. She did this a lot, and it meant a lot of things. It was hope, it was moving forward, it was organizing, but then she did this.
I did that?
And she
Okay.
did it twice. It was like this. And then she said, we don't have to be friends. As she reached out sideways. But we have to organize. And then her hands did that again. So one more time.
Fighting people.
That's what she's a choreographer, yo.
And this session.
She was watching me.
We are in this space. Our bodies tell us just so much. This twice. Now just remember whatever words you need to remember from the last hour and a half together. Any one of them. And come back one more time. All right, you guys. We're out of here. You are on your way.
You got it, you got it.